Thousands of aircraft depart every day from the nation's airports, but an air traffic controller's job doesn't begin at takeoff. Getting aircraft safely to and from runways can be one of the most challenging jobs for controllers, especially at large, busy airports. And it's not just airplanes they deal with. Ground vehicles and personnel also need to move around the airport. My name is Kyle Warner. Mixing these different kinds of traffic together safely and efficiently is the job of the ground controller, and we'll show you how today on ATCast.
Thank you. JetBlue 1264 Boston, ground taxi ramp via November and Alpha. Boston Tower, Gulfstream 717, I'm for Pop 20 on the ILS 4 right approach. Hey, there's 741's taking off. So 741 Boston Tower, give me thanks for calling 737 distance time now. I'm like pulling clear to land, touch by 717 1005. 117, thanks for the service terminates, clock VFR for the change, so we'll see you back. 117, okay, good night now.
Dan Lindsay joins me from the Tower Lab with more. Dan?
Thanks, Kyle. This is the first in 3 episodes in our series on ground control. In this episode, we're going to talk about what ground control is, what areas of the airport ground control is responsible for, and some of the rules covered in the 7110.65. The next episode will discuss Academy Airport specifically, and the final ground control episode will discuss helicopter operations. Let's begin by explaining what ground control is. There are 3 main operating positions in a control tower. Clearance delivery, which issues an aircraft's initial clearance to operate in the ATC system. Local control, which controls traffic on the runways and in the airspace immediately surrounding the airport. And ground control, which controls traffic on taxiways and other movement areas. Ground control is responsible for getting aircraft or vehicles from one place to another on the airport surface safely and efficiently. This could be aircraft going from a terminal to a runway, vehicles doing runway inspections or snow removal, or aircraft that have landed and need to taxi to a gate or parking area. Ground control also decides what route aircraft or vehicles will take and ensures that there are no traffic conflicts along the way. This is important for pilots because since airplanes are designed primarily for flying, they can be clumsy and awkward to maneuver on the ground. In most aircraft, pilots have limited vision to the sides and no ability to see directly behind the aircraft. In some large aircraft, the pilots may not even be able to see what is directly in front of and below them. Other things like prop wash and jet blast from large aircraft or rotor wash from helicopters can be hazardous to other aircraft, vehicles, or personnel operating nearby. Because of these factors, ground control is vital for keeping traffic on the airport's movement areas safe and organized. What is a movement area? According to the Pilot Controller Glossary, it is the runways, taxiways, and other areas of an airport or heliport which are utilized for taxiing or hover taxiing, air taxiing, takeoff, and landing of aircraft exclusive of loading ramps and parking areas. In other words, movement areas include taxiways, runways, and helipads and do not include ramp or gate areas. Those areas are called non-movement areas. At airports with control towers, such as Academy Airport, aircraft and vehicles must have ATC authorization to enter a movement area, which they get by calling ground control. Any operations on non-movement areas are solely the responsibility of the pilot, aircraft operator, or airport management. At many airports, ground control may also be responsible for clearance delivery and for handling the ATIS. For more on those functions, see episodes 9 and 10 of ATCast. Finally, ground control plays a vital role in helping minimize the risk of runway incursions by specifying where aircraft are to hold short during their taxi clearance, making sure aircraft hold short where they're supposed to, and by assisting the local controller in scanning runways. For more about runway incursions, see episode 11 of ATCast. Airport layout plays a huge role in how ground controllers do their job. Every airport has the same basic features: 1 or more runways, some taxiways, and a ramp area where there might be a terminal or some hangars. But no 2 airports anywhere are exactly alike. Some, like Academy Airport, have a very simple layout, while others, like Boston Logan International, are quite complex. Let's take a look at Academy Airport. These are called parallel runways because they're parallel with each other. An airport can have up to 3 parallel runways, designated right, center, and left. For example, Seattle-Tacoma International Airport has runway 34 right, 34 center, and 34 left. If an airport has more than 3 parallels, different runway numbers will be assigned to avoid confusion. Detroit has 2 sets of parallels. This set is numbered differently, even though it points in the same direction as the other set of parallels. This is called a crossing runway because it crosses the main runways. It may also be called a crosswind runway. The main runways, meaning the runways used most often, aren't simply placed at random. Local wind patterns are studied carefully, and the runways are laid out so that they align with the prevailing winds. The crosswind runway exists so that on occasions when the wind blows from an unusual direction, aircraft can still use favorable winds for landing and taking off. Some airports may have runways arranged in a triangular shape like this one. These are usually old military bases that were built before wind patterns were regularly studied. Instead, the airfields were simply built with runways facing multiple directions. But as you can imagine, this means that one or more runways are rarely, if ever, used because they don't usually align with the wind. Taxiways can be laid out in a variety of ways. Those that are parallel to runways are called parallel taxiways. Several intersections branch off these taxiways so that aircraft can turn off the runways without having to taxi all the way to one end or the other. Aircraft can also depart from an intersection if they don't need to use the entire runway length. Other taxiways exist to help aircraft get from ramp areas out to the main taxiways or from one runway to another. Ramps are areas where aircraft parking areas, hangars, terminals, and other facilities such as fueling stations or fixed base operators are located. Once again, ramps are non-movement areas and ATC does not have jurisdiction there. Other things you'll find on the airport may include the ATC radar antenna, automated weather stations, nav aids and instrument approach equipment, and more. Although aircraft don't go to these locations, you might have vehicles that need to go there for inspections and maintenance. Coming up next, we'll look at the rules for ground control covered in the 7110.65. What areas are considered movement areas? A. Ramps and gate areas. B. Runways and taxiways. C. Hangars and parking areas. D. All of the above. The correct answer is B. Runways and taxiways are movement areas. All others are non-movement areas. True or false? Air traffic control is responsible for operations on both movement and non-movement areas. The answer is false. ATC is only responsible for operations on movement areas. Now let's look at what the 7110.65 has to say about ground control. Chapter 3, Section 1, Paragraph 4 discusses coordination between local and ground controllers. It says, local and ground controllers shall exchange information as necessary for the safe and efficient use of airport runways and movement areas. This may be accomplished via verbal means, flight progress strips, other written information, or automation displays. Your primary means of coordination at Academy Airport will be both verbal and the use of flight progress strips. A. Ground control shall notify local control when a departing aircraft has been taxied to a runway other than one previously designated as active. Pilots can and sometimes do request to depart from a runway that is not active. This can be approved depending on traffic conditions and controller workload, provided the runway is not closed because of a NOTAM. B. Ground control must notify local control of any aircraft taxied to an intersection for takeoff. This notification may be accomplished by verbal means or by flight progress strips. Intersection departures must be noted on flight progress strips. See your ATC training guide for more information on strip marking. Finally, C. When the runways in use for landing or departing aircraft are not visible from the tower, or the aircraft using them are not visible on radar, advise the local or ground controller of the aircraft's location before releasing the aircraft to the other controller. This really isn't a factor here at Academy because all movement areas are fully visible from the tower. However, you should be aware that the east side of Terminal Alpha, the west side of Falcon Air and Spartan Aviation, and the area immediately below the control tower will not be visible to you. This leads us to the next important rule found in Section 1, Paragraph 7. Determine the position of an aircraft before issuing taxi instructions or takeoff clearance. Basically, you can't tell an aircraft to do something until you know where it is. Aircraft should inform you of their position when they make their initial call, but if they don't, you must ask them by saying, say position or say parking spot. You can determine an aircraft's position visually by asking the pilot or by using ground radar if available. Chapter 3, Section 7 is where you'll find the specifics on how to move aircraft around the airport surface. Do not issue conditional instructions that are dependent upon the movement of an arrival aircraft on or approaching the runway, or a departure aircraft established on a takeoff roll. The above requirements do not preclude issuing instructions to follow an aircraft observed to be operating on the movement area in accordance with ATC clearance or instruction, and in such a manner that the instructions to follow are not ambiguous. For example, you can't tell an aircraft to cross runway 28 right after arriving traffic because that would be a conditional instruction. A conditional instruction is any instruction that requires a pilot to do one thing after something else happens in the future. In this case, crossing a runway after another aircraft on final lands. The reason you don't issue them in this circumstance is because a pilot may only hear the cross runway 28 right part of the instruction and cause a runway incursion. It's much safer to just wait until the aircraft can cross the runway and issue the instruction then. You can issue a conditional instruction for something like having one aircraft follow another one on a taxiway, such as follow the United Airlines Boeing 757 onto taxiway Bravo, as long as you are clear as to who is following whom. Basically, instructions involving runways cannot be conditional, but instructions involving taxiways can. Do not use the word cleared in conjunction with authorization for aircraft to taxi, or equipment or vehicle or personnel operations. Use the prefix taxi, proceed, or hold as appropriate for aircraft instructions, and proceed or hold for equipment, vehicles, or personnel. The only time you use the word cleared in the tower is when issuing an IFR clearance or a clearance to land or take off. Also, the word taxi is used only with aircraft. Vehicles always proceed to their destination. Intersection departures may be initiated by a controller, or a controller may authorize an intersection departure if a pilot requests. Issue the measured distance from the intersection to the runway end rounded down to the nearest 50 feet to any pilot who requests and to all military aircraft, unless use of the intersection is covered in appropriate directives. At Academy Airport, you may be required to use intersection departures for certain types of aircraft for training purposes. When doing so, you'll have to provide the distance remaining from that intersection to the end of the runway if the pilot requests it, and to all military aircraft. These distances can be found on the Academy Airport map in your air traffic control training guide. Avoid clearances which require A. heavy jet aircraft to use greater than normal taxiing power, and B. small aircraft or helicopters to taxi in close proximity to taxiing or hover taxi helicopters. Heavy jets and helicopters produce a tremendous amount of turbulence from their engines or rotors while taxiing. As the note which follows says, use caution when taxiing smaller aircraft or helicopters in the vicinity of larger aircraft. Hold a taxiing aircraft or vehicle clear of the runway as follows. A. Instruct the aircraft or vehicle to hold short of a specific runway. B. Instruct aircraft or vehicle to hold at a specified point. C. Issue traffic information as necessary. You will often hold aircraft short of runways, but you may also need to hold an aircraft short of a taxiway, or have it hold for aircraft that may be crossing in front of it. Always issue traffic so that pilots know what to expect. Up next, we'll review the key points from this episode. Which of the following words is used to instruct a vehicle to move from one place to another on an airport surface? A. Proceed. B. Taxi. C. Drive. D. Both A and B. The answer is A. Proceed is the only word that can be used with vehicles. Taxi is used only for aircraft. Which of the following statements is an example of a conditional instruction? A. Cross runway 28 right. B. Cross runway 28 right, traffic 3 mile final. C. Cross runway 28 right after landing traffic. Or D. Cross runway 28 right, hold short runway 28 left. The answer is C, because it requires a pilot to wait until an aircraft is landed on the runway and then cross after it. Now for a quick review. Ground control is responsible for all operations happening on movement areas, which include runways, taxiways, and helipads. Ground control is also responsible for ensuring the safe and efficient movement of aircraft, vehicles, and personnel on these areas, and for deciding how they will move from one location to another. Coordination between local and ground control is vital for efficiently moving traffic and for preventing runway incursions. Before issuing any movement instructions, you must first know where an aircraft or vehicle is. This should be stated during the pilot or vehicle operator's initial call, but if it's not, you must ask by saying, "Say position," or "Say parking spot." You cannot issue conditional instructions to aircraft that involve crossing runways. You must wait until the aircraft is safely able to cross the runway and issue the instruction then. Do not use the word "cleared" when giving taxi instructions. Use the word "taxi" for aircraft movements and "proceed" for vehicle movements. If an aircraft is departing from an intersection instead of using the full runway length, you must issue the remaining runway length rounded down to the nearest 50 feet if the pilot requests it, and to all military aircraft. The local controller must be notified of the intersection departure either verbally or by noting it on the flight progress strip. That's a quick overview of how ground control works. Be sure to check out our next episode to learn about procedures and phraseology you'll use in class when dealing with aircraft and vehicles at Academy Airport. Back to you, Kyle.
Thanks, Dan. On behalf of UND Air Traffic Control, the Student Air Traffic Controller Association, and the Aerospace Network, thanks for watching. My name is Kyle Warner. Frequency change approved.
Learn more about UND Air Traffic Control and watch more episodes of ATCast by logging on to www.undsatca.org. Students may interactively test their knowledge by taking the ATCast quizzes on SATCA's Easy LMS page. ATCast can also be downloaded for free to your portable media device. Just search for ATCast on iTunes U.